Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. I'm Nick, I'm your host, and it's episode 135. And in this episode, I talk with Stephen Knight about possibly the most important or most urgent topic for ministry leaders, and that's volunteer recruitment. So we talk about volunteer recruitment ideas. What does Stephen do in his church that's kind of like the ongoing recruitment? How does he do it week to week? But then also, what are some of the bigger ideas that show up every now and then that help recruit in an even bigger way? So we talk about that. He has a free ebook all about volunteer recruitment, and you can get that and more in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 135. But let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Stephen about volunteer recruitment, ideas, practices, retainment, all of that. Let's jump in and listen. Today I'm talking with Stephen Knight. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Hey, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your ministry before we jump in and get started here.
Yeah, well, my name's Stephen Knight. Ministry-wise, I'm the family life pastor at Fellowship Bible Church in Waco, Texas. There I can work with kids ministry, student ministry, college ministry, ministry to parents, kind of some of those different dynamics you think of when you think family ministry. And also have a ministry website called Kidman Tools that I run. Family-wise, very blessed. I've got my wife, Katie. I'm married about 6 years now, coming up on 7, and then 2 little boys, Samuel and Joseph. They're 3 and 1 right now, so they're sweet little boys that lots of energy, and we love every day with them. So very blessed by them, and blessed by the ministry I get to do.
That's awesome. And you've been there 2 years. So do you feel like you've settled in and everything? It's home and it's all just familiar, or are you still learning some things and culture and adjusting? What's that like?
I think for the most part, really settled in and kind of, especially the first year, almost year and a half, a lot of it's just getting familiar, getting to know people, culture, things like that. Just feel like kind of at a place now where just now getting started on kind of some of the things that we're looking ahead, future ministry wise, things like that. So, which for me, I love it. It's a really good place to be in. I'm of course still getting to know people. We're a church of, I think right now, somewhere between 600 and 700. So of course it takes time to get to know that many people, but just in a really great place right now, kind of getting finished settling in and getting going with more ministry.
Cool. And you're the family life pastor. I'm gathering, because something nowadays, like you hear that term used to mean some different things. In your case,
sure.
Does that mean you lead children's ministry, but there's this emphasis on partnering with parents and families and all that? Or do you also have an influence over student ministry as well?
So in my role, I oversee birth up through college and then ministry to parents. And I actually work in tandem we've got some we've got some kids ministry staff, a couple of directors, one that works with early childhood, one that works with elementary, intermediate. That's about K through 6th grade in our context. And then we've got a student ministries director that I work with as well. So I kind of have my foot in both worlds, working with some of the kids, working with those staff, working with the student ministry, working with our director there, and a little bit involvement with college as well. So kind of a few different areas that I get to work with, which I love. It's great.
Yeah, and I would say that's probably that's what's happening now in churches, is if you're a family pastor or family life director, it's about birth through high school or college. But sometimes there's folks that'll say family life, and it's children's ministry with an emphasis on partnering.
Right.
So that's
right. Yeah.
It's good to clarify there and to know. We're going to talk all about something that, it doesn't matter if you lead high school or elementary or adult small groups, like you care about this topic, because it's all about recruiting volunteers. And I know you wrote a free ebook on recruiting volunteers, how to find volunteers for your ministry. And we'll give people a link, to get that. But let me start with this, because I think everybody can relate to the idea that we need more volunteers, and it's hard. I mean, most of the time, if you're talking ministry with somebody else, that's the biggest struggle. Why do you think ministry leaders struggle to have enough volunteers and recruit enough volunteers? I mean, there's probably many reasons, but what do you think comes to mind as some of the top reasons?
Sure. Yeah. There's lots of reasons. I think a few of the different ones is one, this is hard because as ministry leaders, whether you're working with kids, you're working with students, whatever your specific ministry might be, we're very aware of the need. But as I talk to more people, as I talk to more churches and get to know the people in churches and encourage them, and especially in our church, I found within the first couple of years, of course, being here, is sometimes people aren't aware of the need. And you're like, wait a second, but we made that big Sunday announcement or whatever it might be. But a lot of times, for some reason, people weren't listening. Maybe they weren't there, et cetera. But that's one of the big reasons is people aren't really actually aware of the need, of the serving opportunities and the need to have more volunteers. And I think a few of the other big reasons, kind of thinking through that when it comes to need, but it's also maybe even just a lack of good vision casting. Of what type of impact someone could have. Sometimes it's, I've used the illustration before. It's kind of like the Titanic's on fire and going down. Like no one wants to jump on it if that's what our vision casting sounds like. But if we've got some good vision casting, that might kind of help. But if we don't have volunteers, it might be kind of how we're casting that vision. Or even sometimes even just a lack of preparation. We said, we need more volunteers. But then when one or two people start to step in and we're not ready for them, that can also get around to that, they're saying they need them, but they really aren't ready for people to step in. And then another big reason I've seen before is sometimes it's harder for us to admit this, but some of our ministries aren't healthy. And because of that, we might have a little bit lower retention rate. So even having volunteers, we don't keep them very long. And that can be a struggle as well of why, we feel like we're short staffed and different things like that. And even some of the people we have, maybe, they're getting burnt out because they're so involved and that hurts because sometimes people need to step out when they get burnt out. As you said, Nick, there's a number of reasons, but I think those are some of the bigger ones that come to mind when I think about that.
Yeah, and I just was saying to somebody the other day the idea that if you really need volunteers and things, quite frankly, are kind of a mess, nobody wants to volunteer for that because they probably see it's a mess. But if things are going well and you still need volunteers, there's almost this subconscious thought of like, that things look like they're okay. Like, I don't know that they need help. It looks great. Behind the scenes might be a different story. They don't know what open roles there are and how many people called out that Sunday or whatever, but it looks like you're okay. So making that need known in a vision way, like you talked about, is really good. So for you guys, and there's so many different ways to recruit volunteers, but what is like the primary way you recruit volunteers? What's the normal, regular go-to thing you do?
So I definitely think there are different ways to do it, but the one or two that I'd say that are biggest for us, first and foremost, it's making the personal ask, talking to people, getting to know people. It's a really big deal. We've talked about this with our staff, our family ministry team. We talk about this a lot with our kids and student ministry staff that are on that team. Are we making the personal ask ourselves, getting to know people, asking them to join the team? That's such a big one. There's something about, and when I say personal, I'm not saying like, hey, let's write up a quick email and send it to 10 people. But go connect with them, go talk to them. Maybe, hey, want to grab coffee with me? Or, if you have to, occasionally we'll even do phone calls. There's still kind of a personal touch to that too, but anything we can do to connect with people personally is, really one of the most effective ways and primary ways that we recruit volunteers. But probably a side note to that of, amidst that, there and the different ways that we do it. There's also another one that's really successful for us. It's become a primary one for us recently, is we've looked to find ways to create first experiences for people to serve in kids ministry or student ministry. And we've kind of looked towards our events as a great way for us to not only build more relationships with our current volunteer team, with the kids and students they work with, but also to use that as an opportunity to invite people to maybe come serve in a specific role, give them kind of that first experience. And from that, then we have a conversation after that of what it might look like to be on our team. So those are kind of really two major ways that we recruit volunteers right now.
Kind of in both cases, but I was thinking more of the first one, the personal ask. How are you even, who do you start with? Like, how are you getting, I talk about this with other church leaders that, there's a lot of prospects out there, that you just haven't talked to. But for you guys, how do you start the conversation? Who's it with? How do you know who they are? Is it at some point when they're getting involved in your church? And even with giving them the behind the scenes or, the peek, again, how do you get them to even, who are you talking to first? How are you reaching out to them with that first contact?
Yeah, when you think first, just for ourselves personally, it's finding ways to continue to build relationships with people. And we never want to have just this attitude of, hey, we're only building relationships just to recruit people, of course. We do want to build relationships for the sake of building relationships and impacting people and discipling them. But to give you examples, looking at some different things going on in your church, what are some ways that you can connect with people who maybe don't run in your circles? So first of all, people that run in your circles, that's the easiest one. Hey, these people, they go to the same school as my kid. I know them. Maybe I can ask them about serving. Maybe you've got people already in your life group or small group, whatever you might call that at your church. If you're part of that, talking to those people and asking them. But even just looking at, for example, if your church has a men's ministry breakfast or something, or I know last year our student ministry director went on the men's retreat that we had and just built relationships with different guys. And from that, as you get to know people, not only can you build those relationships, but those are also people that you can talk to maybe at some point in the future. As you get to know them, see maybe if they might be a good fit, then you can make that personal ask to them as well.
That's good. So for you guys, there isn't a lot of that is your own personal connection, the things, the contacts you're making, the groups you're involved in, the relationships you bump into. Do you do anything specific to get to know new people, other than obviously your life group, like you were talking about, some of those natural areas? Because I find a lot of, especially if we're talking children's ministry, one of the struggles is, I can't meet new people because I'm in children's ministry all the time. You know what I mean? There's no, especially on the weekend, I don't have the availability to meet new people. Do you see that with some other leaders? How's that work for you?
I see that sometime, and I think a lot of it comes down to, so let's take Sunday morning, for example, right? For most people in kids ministry or student ministry, it kind of depends on what's going on, but let's even narrow it down. Let's take kids ministry, because Sunday morning is always a busy time, right? Depending on your role, size of your church, maybe that looks a little different, but typically can be pretty busy. But a lot of it is figuring out on a Sunday morning, let's say you're the kids director, how do I make some time that morning, just even a little bit of room, so that I can just, maybe it's simple as greeting parents as they come in and just starting to build the relationship that way. Now, I know if you're out there greeting parents as kids get dropped off, that means someone else has to be running the kids' small group, or someone else has to be helping the worship team with last-minute worship practice or something else. So you kind of have to think through some of those pieces. But one way is just even being available, just to talk to people, get to know those parents as they come in. That's a great group to, over the long term, be making those personal asks to, because they've got kids. They're very interested in seeing the kids' ministry do well. So connecting with parents. And then in addition to that, looking at, and I know we live in such a busy culture that it's hard to say, oh, hey, let's add 3 or 4 more things every week. And I'm not necessarily saying that, but just look at your church's calendar and just see, hey, are there some things where maybe these are unique opportunities for me to get to know other people in the church as a way that maybe I can invest in them, maybe I can ask them to be a part of a team, maybe a whole church event. If your church has something like that, just looking at some different creative ways to connect with people. But I think, that sounds overwhelming at first, but, just start simple. Maybe it's as simple, make a few tweaks in your Sunday morning so you have time to talk to people, connect with them, parents as they drop off. Even some of your volunteers, maybe it's their spouses, connecting them as they come. Maybe long term, you can invite those spouses to join the team.
How about other ways that you recruit? So those are kind of your primary, your go-to, your ongoing. But oftentimes when people are asking about volunteer recruiting, they're looking for like that other idea or that other thing, you know what I mean? That thing that's not maybe the thing you do every week or every month, but once in a while. Do you do anything like that?
Yeah. So just kind of thinking through the flow of the calendar, and we talk about this in our family ministry team, is there's really 3 times a year that you want to be more active in recruiting. We kind of think of it as something that we, of course, do throughout the year. But there are 3 bigger times when we're preparing for new seasons. One is kind of in August, maybe even through early September, as we prepare for that fall season. That's probably the biggest one every year for us. Then also looking at December and early January as we prepare for that spring season. And then we do, again, kind of thinking about the summer. Usually have a few people that kind of step out, even if it's just for the summer. So we kind of prepare in May for that as well. So with that in mind, thinking about the seasons, we do find ways to promote serving opportunities to the church. That's not just in kids and student ministries, but we'll do that with multiple ministries, but promoting some of those serving opportunities to the church, but looking for creative things. Like one thing we found is really helpful is to highlight volunteers that we have serving in the church, helping to not only share their story of how they're involved and what they're seeing, but also to show the impact that they're having in the ministries as well. That's actually been really powerful as you hear those testimonies. We've kind of styled that because sometimes your volunteers, it's a little bit of a challenging thing. They get nervous when you say, hey, can you come up in a church service and share? So might even just style it of, hey, can we just bring you up and ask you a few questions, kind of like a Q&A format. I've done that a few times with volunteers in our kids and student ministry, just to bring them up and just to ask them questions and really just hear their heart. And I think that is one of the helpful things that we've done before that can really help motivate people and see, oh, hey, this makes an impact. They're using their gifts and they're seeing, hey, none of us are perfect, but we can make a difference. I think that's been one of the helpful things we've done before, and we'll continue to do. Also just thinking about how to promote the serving opportunities, because you don't want it to be just something that's really vague, but you want to try to promote, okay, hey, here are the specific opportunities that we have to serve to get invested. So writing out what some of those volunteer opportunities might be. We've done that before. We're actually, the next time we do it, working on creating almost like a adopt a child type of cards where you've got the serving opportunities going to be on the table, and we've got some wire and we're going to hang it behind there and promote it that way and kind of try to put a creative spin on it. So you've seen that be helpful, just communicating that with the church, and they get to stop by. It's kind of a no pressure thing. You check it out and do that. But one of the things that we talk about a lot is again, thinking about making what we call the ask. In our personal circles, as we're getting to know people, at the end of the day, we only know so many people, right? And there's only so many people that we can know and have those conversations with. But if you think about your family ministry team, right, your kids ministry, your student ministry teams, all the volunteers that are on those teams, think about how many more people that they know that run in their circles. So it's actually been exciting to see, and we've started to implement this here, and I've seen this before too, where churches invite their volunteers actually to make the ask, as they continue to cast vision to their team, encourage them to cast that vision to others, ask their friends, ask their spouses, because when you think about how many people your entire team knows, that's such a much bigger circle than you or I in our circles. Even if we're full-time staff, we can only know so many people. So I think that's a big thing too. And we've seen on your teams, usually everyone can think of some people and talk to them. And then usually you get a few people that are a little more proactive than the others, and they're really excited. And we've had that too, where we've had, man, these are like our champion recruiters for kids ministry and student ministry. And they're out and hey, we've got 5 new people in student ministry. And it's all because this one gal was out recruiting, you know what I mean? And, but there's so much power in the asking your team to make that ask and to help recruit in that way. That's been a really effective one for us.
That's good. We've even done that in like a competition style.
Oh, yeah?
The goal is by preschool room. We did this one time. So I act like we've done a lot. We did it one time, but it was a time when we really needed a boost. We'd moved into a building and we're well staffed, but then all of a sudden didn't have enough, kind of thing. And so it was kind of like, hey, if you can get at least, the goal is at least one new volunteer per room. That way it wasn't per person because it's a little harder.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a little too much pressure maybe. But if you can do more than one per room, there's prizes and, just having fun with it. And there's certainly some people who are like, not going to recruit anybody and they don't even know and they don't even want to ask. They're just too shy. Then there's other people who are like, I'm asking my whole small group. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to win this competition or whatever. So that's been helpful.
I love that
too. And I just talked to somebody today who, and they're doing kind of the two things you mentioned because they're doing, they're doing the personal request, like they're talking to people one-on-one, but they're also doing, a lot of churches might be familiar with like the say yes idea that if you use Orange Curriculum, there's a talk about that from Reggie years ago. And I've seen people set up lobbies kind of like you're talking about with the needs they have. And it's like, say yes to serving with kids or say yes to the next generations, say yes to serving, whatever you want to call it. And they'll list like the opportunities. And so they're doing that. And, that's helping them. They're already making progress in there because they're listing some of those needs and they're getting people to sign up. But the other thing they're doing, like you mentioned, is you talked about interviewing people kind of live about serving and all that. They're just doing quick cell phone recordings of people saying, why did you say yes to serving in kids? What's that been like?
Yeah.
And I think they're in the process of just turning that into quick social media videos, and I told them, what I'd also do is take all of them, put it in 1 2-minute or 3-minute video and email it to, a bunch of people maybe who aren't serving. So I think the variety of ideas is helpful, and because you can't do the same thing every month. You know what I mean? Like you can always do your regular thing that like you talked about, the personal ask. That's forever every week, but you can't always do the push from stage or the small, like the recruitment competition or, whatever it is, the say yes campaign in the lobby. I mean, you can't do everything all the time. So how do you mix it up? I think that's helpful. How about, if I can't even back it up a little bit, how do you prepare to recruit volunteers?
Well, you kind of think about preparing. Sometimes we just think, okay, well, we need people. Let's just go ask for the people, right? And maybe you're ready, maybe you're not, but I think there's something to be said about preparing in a few different areas. So that way, when the people do respond, you're completely ready. So first, I think of creating a list of serving opportunities, right? It sounds basic, but at least having a basic list that describes what you're looking for. So, okay, do we need a teacher for kinder through 4th grade? Do we need a small group leader working with our 2nd graders? Like just listing out what you need and how many of them I think is really helpful. So that way as people start to respond, you can figure out what's a good fit, get them connected, and then you can keep a running list of what serving opportunities you still have. I think starting with that is really helpful. Even thinking about what are some of your next steps you might have in your ministry, which is really hard when you're thinking, oh man, I just need people for Sunday, right? And I think many churches are in that place of, I just need more people for Sunday. So I totally get that. But take a step, pause, maybe go get coffee, whatever you need to do, write out kind of a list, man, in the next year or two, what type of serving opportunities do we want on our teams? What would it be really exciting to see? Man, it'd be exciting to see maybe having someone running AV, audiovisual for our large group, or what else, just think through what some of those opportunities are, write them out, and certainly start with recruiting for some of your more urgent ones. You do want to, of course, start with where the need is first, but also be thinking of those because you might talk with someone who's like, I don't really want to work with kids. I'm not really great with kids. And you can respond and say, hey, you know what? That's okay because we've got these other opportunities that are, yes, they're in the kids ministry, but you don't have to sit there and have an hour and a half conversation with the kid in order to make a difference. You can serve in a behind the scenes role of some kind. So it's helpful to have that list. And as you kind of think through that list a little bit more, even we at our church, we call them position profiles. It's just a short description of what each volunteer does, what they're doing in their role. So what are your expectations for a small group leader, right? What are they doing? And it sounds basic, like, yeah, okay, I know this, people should know this. But some people don't. Like, they come in and they're not familiar with your kids ministry, your student ministry, or whichever ministry you're part of. And it's helpful to just bring clarity to what some of those expectations are, even just what they're doing, but also how often they're doing it, and what all that looks like. So thinking through that. And then, Nick, just thinking through our ministries too. This is one of the harder things to do. But assessing our ministries first, just to pause and say, okay, we're recruiting people. Are our ministries healthy right now? And just to look at each one, because if it's not healthy, think, are there any steps that I can take in the next week, in the next month, even look at steps in the next year to make this ministry healthier, because that might attract more volunteers. Just by having a healthier ministry, it can help before you recruit to be in a little bit better place. And then just a few other quick thoughts, and love to hear just what are some of your thoughts in prepping, of course, too. But just with your position, some of them might be right to have like end dates, like, hey, we're asking people to serve for the school year, and then they can re-up after that or something like that. But at the end of the day, even when you think about your serving opportunities for the volunteers, just making it a place where people want to serve, right? They can make an impact. They get to connect. If it's a people ministry, like in kids ministry and small groups or student ministry, whatever it might look like, where they get to connect with the people that they're serving. They enjoy what they're doing. They're in community. They don't just show up, serve and leave and don't connect with anyone, but just connect with the other volunteers that are there and be in community with them and see some of that impact they're having, and just be appreciated by the ministry leaders that are overseeing those ministries. I think those are some key things, and of course we could unpack that more, but I think those are a few just key things to think about as you're preparing to recruit volunteers.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you, I resonate with a lot of that stuff, even what you said early on about just knowing what your needs are and all that. I can't tell you how many times people, say, I need more volunteers, and I might ask how many, and they're just like, more. There's more than I have now.
More, yeah.
Yeah, there is something powerful about, I know how many roles there are, and I know how many are open, versus how many are filled, and so I know what I got to get. You know what I mean? Like, I know, yeah. And it's funny how often that isn't known. So anybody listening right now, that might be an easy thing to start with, is just, what do you need? You know what? And some people, I understand the position that you can be in too, where it's like, I'm in like survival mode. So if I sit here thinking about what I would like, I mean, wow, that's going to be a lot. But part of me is like, yeah, do it. I mean, that's how you'll get there, is you got to start with what do you want it to look like, even if what it is now is so far away. And if thinking about, volunteer recruitment, I know for us, there are times when I can look through our history when we've been able to recruit more volunteers, than usual. And then you've only been at this church for 2 years. So who knows, maybe this will be at this church, or maybe you'll think back to a past church. But what's the time when you were able to recruit the most volunteers? Like, what was involved? Why do you think you were able to recruit the most volunteers in a, kind of a shorter time frame?
I'll tell you what, there's one time in particular, it was about 6 months after I came in. We had an early childhood director, fantastic gal. She'd been at the church for, I think, like 17 years and was kind of ready to step out of that role. And when she did, there was a number of people serving on her team, that great people, but they weren't necessarily super passionate about working with kids. They just really liked the director. And I'm really glad they had great relationships with the director and everything. But it was almost kind of shocking. Here I am, 6 months, definitely the new guy. As the family life pastor, early childhood director says, hey, I think it's time for me to step down. And with that, we saw a lot of volunteers all of a sudden that were like, you know what, I think I might step out too. It kind of all happened at once. So we're kind of looking at each other and on staff and going like, okay, what is happening, right? So all of a sudden there's this huge need to recruit volunteers working with early childhood. And my personality and just how we think of ministry church. It's not just like, hey, let's get some more bodies in there quick. It's like, no, we do need people there. But we want people who actually want to work with kids and want to love into them and invest in their lives. And so thinking, okay, we've got to figure this out quickly. In that instance, that was like, okay, we need people for Sunday, ASAP. We need people ongoing, etc. So I started by just going to a number of people who are very involved in the church, right? And they're some of your most committed people. And I just found some people. I said, hey, can you just temporarily step into early childhood? You're very committed to church. I think you'd be great with kids, but just help us kind of during the next month or so. So found some people to help for a little bit of time in there. And then kind of during that time, we spent a lot of time making the personal ask. That was probably one of the busier times that we've ever had. And a lot of my week really was spent recruiting. A lot of, because we didn't have an early childhood director, we also needed to find a new early childhood director. So I was kind of working on that process, but also trying to recruit. And it took a couple months to start to get to a better place. But just really making that personal ask was the biggest factor during that time of getting to know people, talking to parents. Even a few of the people that stepped in to help ended up staying longer because they really enjoyed working with the kids. And that was kind of, I think we recruited, it was between 25 and 30 volunteers within the span of about a month and a half, really. So just a lot of people that came on. And of course you have to do training and all that stuff too. So it's just a really quick turnaround. But I think the biggest thing was just casting that vision and talking to people individually in those relationships. And a few key people that were working with me, as volunteers in that ministry kind of helped and made that personal ask as well. But I think, that was a really good time where we recruited a lot of people to be working with our kids then.
That's good. Yeah, I always say, and you just can't do this all the time, but for us, it's almost always been the times we've added a service, because I think it's just clear need. There's another service. Oh, obviously you need more people because you're adding a service. Meets the vision, because then you could talk about why you need volunteers and what for and what's that going to be like. And I'm thinking more church-wide, not just in our kids ministry, but even in kids ministry. That's probably when we've recruited the most people. And that's great. You can't do it every time, but like, even if you look back through our church's history, I was telling you, we've only been around for 13 years. The 3 or 4 best growth years were the years we added a service and recruited a ton of volunteers alongside that. And it grew the church. And it kind of makes sense, because the volunteers, get plugged in, more people get plugged in volunteering, then they attend more frequently and invite and all that stuff. So that's probably been our best times. We've had a couple other things that were good. But man, there's few things that help as much as adding an entire service and saying, hey, we need help. We're doing this. We just did it a few weeks ago. We added a Monday night service, and it's like, that's a whole different ball game, who can help here. And sure enough, people sign up, and you get those people we added this, we're recording here in early February. That service started like the second Monday in January. And there was a sense, I think, of like, it's a new year. I haven't been involved here, been attending, and you're adding the service, and it just felt like it was a good time to step in. And that's a good example of somebody. It's like, hey, you've been here for 9 months. We could have used you 6 months ago, but you thought everything looked fine, and
right.
You weren't even thinking about it. You just weren't even thinking about volunteering. But this new opportunity and the new year and all that put that on their mind. So it's good to like be able to catch people with some different bigger initiatives from time to time. So let's wrap up with this. A big part of recruiting could be retainment, right? You're losing. So, I had somebody ask me a couple weeks ago, I want to say she was losing at least a third. If she looked back over the last year, it was like a third of the volunteers stepped down. I think it was more than that, though. It might have been 2/3. Which is a lot, obviously, for anybody. And she was asking like, what's good? What's normal? And I'm like, good question. I've talked about this with leaders. I measure our own retainment, and like my experience has been, and I'm just throwing this out there, but I don't know many churches that don't lose at least 10% a year, 15%. I think that's very normal. I've seen stats that, 10 to 15% of people are going to just stop attending your church every year. They move, whatever. So that's very normal. And I told her if I was losing more than 20%, though, I'd probably be a little alarmed. 25, I'd start to think, okay, what's going on here? But
Sure.
for you guys, what's retainment look like? How do you, I mean, you've been there 2 years, but how are you doing with it? And how do you, keep people serving in roles so that retainment isn't the issue?
Right. Yeah. And like you said, regardless of what you do, you always have a few people that'll need to step off of teams for different reasons and things. But as you think about just retaining volunteers, I think just starting with just continuing to cast vision. Sometimes we get excited, we recruit, we do a really good job of that and get people in, and then they never hear about the impact that they're having. And unless they see some that they're doing themselves, they don't hear those stories. So I think not only casting vision and continuing to cast vision for the impact they're having, but also just sharing those stories. We call them wins here. We celebrate wins together. It might be, hey, we're going to share these stories when we have our volunteer trainings or meetings or whatever, or maybe we're sending out an email occasionally just said, hey, here's some wins that we saw in the last month, the last 2 months, and just continuing to share about the impact they're having. And people like being a part of something bigger than themselves and being able to celebrate that and be a part of that. So just thinking about continuing to celebrate those wins, but also just creating community. It's so interesting in the church. We all crave that community, right? And I think there are different ways that we can find it, certainly, but one of the big ones can be on our actually serving teams. So let's say you're working in student ministry, right? Student ministry, if you're involved, tends to be a fairly involved type of ministry. You're working with teens, sometimes even mentoring some of them. Maybe you're leading a small group, but you go through some really exciting times and some very difficult ones. But in the midst of that, the week to week, one of the things that I think is most helpful is not only going through that and serving in that ministry, but also just connecting with the other leaders. Might be as simple as, hey, before our weekly gathering for students, we're going to meet for 15, 30 minutes beforehand. We're just going to spend some time together. We're going to pray. We're going to encourage each other. Just even have some social time. We try to do it, hopefully a couple times a year is the goal. We try to work towards that of getting our leaders somewhere, getting them connected, just spending time together, and from that, especially if you give them, you need to kind of get past the introductions phase, right? And you're continually bringing in new leaders, either to replace others that have left or as your ministry grows, which we all hope is happening, of course, but then you bring in more leaders to help with that growing ministry. You just have to continue to look for ways to kind of break down some of those barriers between people, help them get to know each other. And then once you find ways to start that community, oftentimes it kind of takes on its own life and continues itself. You see leaders connecting with each other on the hallway on a Sunday morning. You see them calling each other or texting. We use a service, an app called GroupMe. We've got all of our student ministry leaders in there, and occasionally they'll just text each other and encourage each other or ask for prayer or different things like that. And just finding community is a big deal for people, so that it's not just hey, I come in and I serve. We don't want to have this mindset of it's kind of like a time clock. Come in, punch it, punch out, you're done. But you come and you have an impact. But while you're having impact, you're also serving with people who know you, who love you, and are doing some of the same things you're doing. And they're right there alongside you. So I think that's really powerful too. When you think about retaining volunteers, even just a few other quick things too. Just thinking about having, especially when you think about kids ministry specifically, having subs. We try to have a sub list, people that, hey, if they're available, they're happy to step in. We have this with our small group leader sometimes. Hey, something came up. Hey, this huge sermon's happening out of town with my kid. I need to go away. Or, hey, there's something family thing that came up. I think people stay longer when they have the flexibility to be able to step out when life's circumstances happen. I think that's an important thing. And then just praying for them and appreciating them. So for our leaders, we'll send thank you cards. We'll try to catch them in person if they did something well, and just right there, just say, hey, man, that was really good. Yeah, I love the way you're connecting with those kids. Give them high fives. Man, that's so good. I so appreciate that. Thank you. And then even looking at, we do a yearly event where we're bringing all of our volunteers together, kind of see it as an appreciation time. We'll have some competitions and give away some gift cards, kind of a fun thing, and we'll do some training amidst that. So you get to appreciate them and then also just train them as well. And just making sure when they come, they're resourced well and they're just really setting them up for success.
That's awesome. I think that is, it's a big part of recruitment is retainment. And yep, it's normal that people are going to step off every year, but it's not normal if it's half, you know what I mean? And of course,
right.
Whenever there's a change, like you said, coming in, as people stepped off when that director stepped down, that's kind of normal too. So I think it's important for people to assess, and I think most leaders though don't even know, you know what I mean? Because nobody's tracking,
Sure.
How many are stepping off each year. So you don't really know. So that one lady I mentioned, she went back and looked and was shocked as she should have been because 2/3 stepping off is a lot. So
sure. Yeah.
Just imagine then you got to recruit that many more, to keep just to keep up with people stepping off. So that is a big part of it for sure. How about, how can people connect with you if they have any questions or want to learn more? And we'll link to some of the stuff, but tell us a little bit more about the ebook as well.
Sure. Yeah. People can connect with me. I've got a website, kidmantools.com. You're welcome to look through the website. My email, you're more than welcome to shoot me an email if you got questions or thoughts, or it's Stephen@kidmantools.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram as well. If you're interested in the ebook, as I was working through some of these recruiting strategies, different things, hey, this worked, this didn't, I just kind of put it together and said, I'm going to give away. It's free on my website. You can go pick it up on kidmantools.com, but just something to just help people as they're trying to think of, okay, I'm trying the same things and they're not working, or maybe they're working, but with limited success. What are some new ideas? So just to try to help in that process there. But yeah, happy to connect with people. They got questions, thoughts, snide remarks, anything like that.
Nice. Cool. Well, thanks for taking time to come on the podcast, talk about one of the most important topics to people in volunteer recruiting. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, that was helpful. And I feel like it was, just ground level in the weeds volunteer recruitment. You know what I mean? It wasn't splashy. It's not these big things that we think, man, if we could just do that one thing or that one event, then we'll solve it. As you could hear from the interview, and this is my experience too, Stephen's ideas were all about the practical work of recruiting, of getting to know people, talking to people, throwing a couple, bigger things that you can do every now and then. But it's mostly about that week-to-week work of making the personal ask. And here are a few action items I think of coming out of that interview. We talked about, do you know how many volunteers you need? Not just more, but specifically how many roles do you have, how many are filled, and how many more volunteers do you need? And if you really want to take that to another level, you could put how many do we need to get by and do this well? But then how many would I want if this ministry were to grow by 25%, or if we wanted to implement other levels of leadership like coaches or whatever? I think it's great to come up with that need and then also that dream, that want, because for the church or your ministry to grow, you're going to have to kind of get there and build it. And many times it will grow because you have grown the team to that size. Not, a lot of times we think, oh, it grows and then we recruit the volunteers to staff it. Not usually. It's usually the other way around. Another action item would be to download that ebook of Stephen's, go through that. Some of that stuff will be repeated from what we talked about today, but some won't. And maybe put down 2 or 3 steps from the interview and from the ebook that you can take this month, let's say, to recruit more volunteers. Can you set aside time every week? And I always say an hour or 2 at the beginning of the week, hour or 2 at the end of the week. And that's a lot, granted, but we're talking about the most important thing when it comes to recruiting volunteers, to work on it, to contact people, to follow up, to schedule meetings, to interview people that are onboarding. Can you commit to giving that time every week? Because when I ask people how much time do you usually give a week to volunteer recruitment, the answer I usually get is 1 hour, no hours, 2 hours, maybe. Some people will say 2 hours, but it's usually no time or 1 hour. And so commit to give it some time. That action item alone can make a huge difference in your volunteer recruitment. As I mentioned in the beginning, you can get all the notes and links and all that in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 135. So I hope this was helpful. Hope you love this interview. You'll walk away some specific ways to recruit more volunteers for your ministry this week. So until we talk again, I hope you have a great week. Hope you start recruiting some more volunteers, maybe even get somebody that you're talking with who's interested before you even listen to the next episode next week. Until then, Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.